His name was Caleb Harmon, and he had buried his wife 8 months ago. Clara had been everything. The warmth in their home, the laughter in the morning, the steady hand that kept 4 wild, beautiful children from falling apart. She had died in the middle of winter, quietly, the way good people sometimes do, as if they don't want to make a fuss about leaving. And when she was gone, Caleb was left standing in the middle of a life he suddenly didn't know how to live. He had 4 children. Rosie, who was 7 and carried a rag doll everywhere because her mother had sewn it for her the week before she got sick. Tommy, who was 6 and ate lollipops when he was nervous, which was most of the time now. May, who was 4 and still asked every morning where Mama had gone. And baby Grace, barely 13 months old, who had never really known her mother at all, and that was the one that broke Caleb's heart clean in 2 every single day. He had tried to hold things together in their small homestead outside of Millbrook. But winter had been brutal, their crops had failed, and the landlord had given him 2 months to find a way to pay his debts or clear off the land. Caleb had packed what he could, loaded the children into the wagon, and made the long, hard journey to the town of Crestfield, where an old friend had written to him saying there was work at the new mill. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, tired from the road, his children dusty and hungry and wide-eyed at the noise of a proper town. He had just enough money for 1 meal and a room for 1 night. The mill job was supposed to start Thursday. He just needed 2 days. He stopped in front of the boarding house on the main street, a wide, clean building with flower boxes in the windows. It was run by a woman named Harriet Caulfield. Harriet Caulfield was the kind of woman who had made herself important in a small town through sheer force of opinion. She was not cruel by nature, but she had built her life on order and propriety, and she had decided long ago that disorder was the enemy of a peaceful life. She saw Caleb's wagon, saw the 4 dusty children, and her face tightened before he even opened his mouth. "Ma'am," Caleb said, politely, hat in hand, "I'm looking for a room for 2 nights. I've got work starting Thursday at the mill. I can pay you now for the first night and I don't rent to drifters," she said flatly. "I'm not a drifter, ma'am. I'm a working man. I can see what you are." She looked at the children with barely concealed disgust. 4 children, no wife in sight, and a lot of you look like you've been dragged through a field. I have other guests, clean guests. I won't have this circus in my establishment. Caleb kept his voice steady. "It's just 2 nights, ma'am." I said no. He stood there for a moment, nodded once, and began to turn away. But Harriet wasn't finished. She stepped out onto the porch and raised her voice, deliberately, so the street could hear. "And don't go thinking any other decent house in this town will take you in either. A man who can't even keep his children clean is no kind of man at all. You'd do better to take those poor little things to the county orphanage and let people who know what they're doing raise them properly." The street went quiet. Rosie's chin started to tremble. Tommy stopped chewing his lollipop. May hid her face against Caleb's leg. And baby Grace, perhaps sensing the tension in her father's arms, let out a thin, tired cry. Caleb turned back to face Harriet one more time. His jaw was set, his eyes were steady, he did not raise his voice. "These children have a father who loves them," he said quietly. "That's more than most people in this world can say. Good day, ma'am." He walked away. The crowd parted, for him in silence. Word spread through Crestfield the way it always does in small towns, fast and unstoppable. By afternoon, everyone knew about the widowed father who had been turned away from Harriet Caulfield's boarding house with 4 small children in tow. Opinions were divided. Some agreed with Harriet. The town had standards, after all. Others felt a quiet, uncomfortable shame. One of those people was a man named George Aldred. George Aldred was the owner of the Crestfield Mill, the very mill where Caleb was supposed to begin work on Thursday. He had been sitting at the window of the barber shop across the street when the whole scene unfolded. He had seen Caleb's quiet dignity. He had seen the little girl's trembling chin. And he had seen something else too, something that had stopped his breath for a moment. Around Caleb's neck, just visible beneath his open collar, was a small silver medal. George Aldred knew that medal. He had seen it before. He had, in fact, pinned it onto a young soldier's chest himself, 15 years ago, on a battlefield in Virginia, because he had been a colonel in the Union Army, and Caleb Harmon had been the bravest soldier under his command. George was out of the barber shop before the barber had even put down the scissors. He found Caleb 3 streets over, sitting on the steps of the church with his children gathered around him, sharing a small piece of bread he had bought from the baker. May was asleep against his arm. Grace was quiet at last, her cheek resting on his shoulder. "Caleb Harmon," George said. Caleb looked up. It took a moment. Then his eyes went wide. "Colonel Aldred." George sat down beside him on the church steps, right there in the dirt, without a second thought about his fine coat. "My mill, my town, and I just watched a woman make a spectacle of my best soldier on a public street," George said. "I owe you an apology on behalf of Crestfield." "You don't owe me anything, sir. I owe you more than you know." George paused. "I heard about Clara." "I'm sorry, Caleb. She was a good woman." Caleb nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. "Here's what's going to happen," George said. "You and these children are going to stay at my house tonight. There's a guest wing that's been empty for 2 years. On Thursday you start at the mill. And I have a foreman's position that opened up last week that has your name on it, if you want it." Caleb looked at him. "Sir, I don't need charity." "It's not charity," George said simply. "It's what a man does for another man who once carried him off a battlefield with a bullet in his own leg." "Did you think I forgot that?" Caleb was quiet. Rosie looked up at the old man with serious eyes. "Are you our daddy's friend?" she asked. George Aldred smiled at her. A warm, slow smile. "I'm your daddy's oldest friend, little one. And your family is going to be just fine." The news moved through Crestfield that evening like a warm fire through a cold house. By the next morning, the whole town knew. Caleb Harmon was not a drifter. He was a decorated war veteran. A man of honor. A man who had saved the life of the most respected man in their county, and had never told a soul about it. Harriet Caulfield heard the news over her morning coffee, and she sat very still for a long time. By mid-morning, she was standing at the door of George Aldred's house, hat in hand, the same posture Caleb had been in 2 days ago on her porch. George's housekeeper answered, and a few minutes later, Caleb came to the door. Harriet looked at him. Her voice, when it came, was not the sharp, carrying voice she had used on the street. It was smaller, quieter. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "I said things that were beneath me. In front of your children." She paused. "I am sorry, truly." Caleb studied her for a moment. He thought of May asking, "Daddy, why is she angry at us?" He thought of Rosie's trembling chin. He thought of Clara, and what Clara would say if she were standing beside him right now. He opened the door wider. "Come in, Mrs. Caulfield," he said. "I'll have someone make coffee." Harriet stepped inside. She found 4 children at a wide kitchen table, Rosie drawing pictures, Tommy stacking wooden blocks with May, and baby Grace sitting in a high chair, banging a spoon with enormous satisfaction. And something shifted in Harriet Caulfield that morning. Something that had been closed for a very long time. She sat down at that table. She asked Rosie about her drawing. She held Grace while Caleb poured the coffee. And she stayed for 2 hours. Within a month, Harriet's boarding house had a standing arrangement with the mill, clean, reasonable rooms for workers and their families. She had renegotiated her own ideas about what order and propriety actually meant. And every Sunday, without fail, the Harmon children could be found at her kitchen table, eating her apple pie, because Rosie had, inexplicably, decided that Mrs. Caulfield made the best apple pie she had ever tasted. Caleb never forgot what happened on that street. But he also never carried it as a wound. He carried it as a reminder that dignity, in the end, doesn't need defending. It defends itself.